Ohayou gozaimasu, Wiru Sensei desu. Yoroshiku onegaishimasu. This is the start of a brand new pixel art tutorial series on my YouTube channel, Will Sensei. Something you may not know about me is that this actually isn't my first time being a sensei. In 2011, I went to Japan and lived there for a whole year while teaching English. I lived in a very rural town in Hokkaido, and it was an interesting, unforgettable experience. I met tons of great people, saw the sights, learned some Japanese, and taught some really wonderful kids. In 2012, I decided to come back here in order to focus on developing games and pixel art, and here we are! Now that my pixel art is kinda taking off, I'm happy to become a sensei again and share some pixel art tips, tricks, and techniques. Every once in a while I might try to sneak in a little Japanese too, just to keep you on your toes. Boku no Nihongo wa amari sugoku nai dake da ne. Dewa, hajimemashou! Ever since I started this YouTube channel, I've gotten a ton of comments asking how I make my color palettes. So for our first lesson today, we're going to focus on exactly that, color palettes. And as a special treat today, I'm also going to be showing off SpriteScene a little. SpriteScene, which you can see all around me right now, is my very own in-development pixel art editor. I have really big plans for it, and it's not quite ready for prime time, but at least for today, it's capable of basic editing and, most importantly, palette management. And I'll make another video in the future about why I'm making a pixel art editor, but that's for another day. So, choosing a good palette is absolutely, positively key to creating good pixel art. Duh, right? It's one of the most important things to get right, yet it's very, very, very easy to get it wrong. Fortunately, it can be pretty easy to fix, but sometimes if you start out with a bad palette, it'll throw off the rest of your image as you're drawing it, and that's not a good situation to get into. So to avoid it, we really want to make a good palette from the start. Now I'm going to show you some of my pixel art. Some of it's going to have good palettes, and some of it's going to have really bad palettes. See if you can tell which is which. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. Here's A. Here's picture A. Take a good look at that. Okay. Here's picture B. Take a good look at that one. Here is picture C. This one might be a little tougher. Okay, and here's picture D. Take a good look at that one too. Alright, do you have your answers ready? Now between these two, A and B, which do you think has the better palette? If you chose A, you're absolutely right. Even though the designs of the sprites are the same, A is a better sprite because it has a better palette. So let's move on to the next two. Now, like I said, this might be a tough one. Which one has a better palette? Now if you chose C, try again. D actually has a better palette. So now we're going to talk about why. What makes a palette good? Well, in my opinion, it might be easier to talk first about what makes a palette bad. When you're drawing and you need a range of colors, one thing a lot of beginners do is they choose one shade they like, and then they lighten it for lighter colors, and they darken it for darker colors. This is a classic mistake. I'm going to show you exactly what happens when you do that. So let's say I want some green grass in my image, right? So I'm going to start with a really dark shade of green. I'm going to just, draw that color just to get it out there. Increase the brightness, increase the brightness, increase the brightness, increase the brightness, and let's get one more color in there, like a really bright grass. Okay. So there's the color palette we would have if we did that. And like I said, this is a classic mistake. Everyone does this when they're starting. I did it. You probably did it. I don't know. We all do it at some point. So if you use a color palette like this, your final image is going to look all muddy, and none of the color groups are going to relate to each other in any way. The browns don't interact with the oranges and reds. The greens won't interact with the yellows. You can see in this green color range, we don't have any sort of yellows at all. To create a good image, we need to make sure the colors in our palette are working together. So we know what not to do, but how do we make our colors work together? One answer is hue shifting. So what is hue shifting? Each color except black and white has a hue. And let's do this palette once again, but with hue shifting, okay? So what I'm going to do is, instead of choosing a really saturated green like I did last time, and I don't think I mentioned this, but you can see my color picker is using some placeholder art. This is supposed to be a crosshair, but instead it's just like a weird shape, so whatever. So I'm going to choose like a really dark, desaturated green, right? but I don't want it right in the middle of the greens in the hue. You can see right here I got my hue slider right at the bottom of this color picker. And what I'm going to do, instead of choosing one right in the middle, is I'm going to choose one that's more towards the blue side. So I'm going to put that right there. That's going to be our very first color. So, like the other color range, what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the brightness, right? But I'm also going to increase the saturation, so that means we move up and to the right here. And your image editor may vary. I've seen image editors with color pickers that don't look quite like this. This is modeled after Photoshop's, so you'll want to be moving up and to the right with that style. Anyway, so we've increased the brightness, we've increased the saturation. Now, the most important step, we want to take our hue and move it a little bit further into the greens. I'm just going to draw that color too. Oops, did not want to do that. Okay. Undoing is a little glitchy. Hopefully we don't crash. So I'm just going to keep redoing that and see what we get, right? So for our next color, we're going to again increase the brightness, increase the saturation, and shift a little more towards yellow. Draw some of that. Increase brightness, increase saturation, increase hue towards yellow. How many colors did we have in this other palette? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's do it a couple more times. Increase brightness, increase saturation, shift a little more towards yellow. Right? Increase brightness, increase saturation, shift a little more towards yellow. Alright. Now, as you can see here, I'm going to get rid of the color picker because it's a little glitchy. I'm just going to show off these colors a little bit more. Give them a little more area to view them. So you can already see our colors in this new group are a lot more interesting, a lot more natural feeling than the colors in our first group. So we're just going to draw a big X over that. We're even going to make it a red X, because we really don't want to do that, right? But this one is good. I know, that's the worst check mark I've ever drawn. So anyway, I know what you're asking. Why do we shift our greens towards yellow? Now, that's a really good question, and I'm sure there's a technical explanation, but let's learn by doing it. So let's say we did exactly the opposite of what we did right here. Okay. So what we did first was we chose a green that was over on the blue side, right? So let's instead choose a green that's over on the yellow side. So, okay. I'm just going to color that, and we're going to do exactly the same steps, but opposite. We're going to move towards blue instead of towards yellow. Increase a little, move the hue just a little. Okay. Increase, oh, maybe a little too much. Move the hue, okay. Increase, move the hue. Alright. Increase, oh, maybe a little too much again. Move the hue a little, okay. And I think we need one more. There we go. And move the hue. Alright, so as you can see, that also results in a kind of interesting color range, but it's clearly not the one we want for grass. Like outdoor, sun shining grass isn't teal, right? Like, I don't know. I just went outside this morning and the grass was not teal. I can confirm this. So we don't want to do this either necessarily. But I mean, it might be right for your scene depending on the lighting. I mean, this kind of palette might work for like a neon light kind of thing, like some kind of, cyberpunk palette. I don't know. But, I mean, it depends on your scene. You can use it if you want, but it's not what we're looking for an outdoor scene, right? So you kind of have to use your best judgment on that. And generally, in terms of hue shifting, as my own personal rule of thumb, blues are kind of my dark color, whereas yellows over here are kind of my light color. They're kind of blue is kind of naturally dark, right? Like if I were to ask you where the darkest point is on this hue slider here, you can see, okay, yeah. Oh, that's pretty dark, right? Then we get lighter, and it's light over here. This is the darkest point, pretty much. And this is kind of the natural lightest point. And I know teal's kind of light too, but we're just going to call it yellow for now. So anyway, those are kind of my two convergence colors. Yellow for the lights and blue for the darks. And the reason for that is not just because they're visually light and dark, but because it also makes sense when you look at how we shift the hues. As my own personal rule of thumb, blues should shift towards violets as you get lighter. Violets should shift towards reds as you get lighter. Reds can shift towards oranges and even yellows as you get lighter. And greens usually start out towards the teal side and shift towards yellow again. And yeah, that's kind of how I do it. But it's not going to work for everything, right? So let's look at the platformer tileset again. I've got that open somewhere over here. Actually, let's look at... I don't need that one. Okay. So here's our platformer tileset again. I'm going to maximize that. All right. So you can see I'm going to zoom in. And this is the one with the good palette, in case you couldn't tell. And the reason we can tell that is because let's look at the terrain here. I'm zoomed way in. So here's the terrain. You got some brown and you got some greens, right? And you can see the green in the ground starts with this dark blue color, right? Dark blue, almost like bluish green color. As we get lighter, we get into greens. You can see it here in my little color square there. We get into like some more solid greens, but then we go past that and we get to the yellow side of the greens, get more yellow, more bright, and then we finally get to like a really bright yellow as our highlight color. And let's look at the browns too. So we start out with like an almost purplish shadow color right here. We go into like some classic, reddish brown kind of thing. We go past that into some oranges, finally into some like yellow brown kind of thing, and finally our last highlight color here is actually exactly the same as this yellow that we used in the top of the terrain. So that's pretty cool, right? You can see that the colors are working together, and that's really important. So you can see that's generally applied throughout the image. But let's look at the background. You can see that these hills in the background here do not follow this rule. So remember what I said earlier, how blues are supposed to go to violets, right? You see blues go to violets as you get lighter. But this clearly doesn't do that. We start with like kind of almost a purplish blue, and we're going towards teal, actually. You can see that here as I click these colors as it appears in the tool panel up there. You can see it goes towards teal as we get lighter and lighter, and that doesn't follow my rule, right? So guess what? That's okay. There's no strict rule that can define every palette, and that's something you kind of have to learn the hard way. I mean, it'd definitely look weird in this image if these blues went into violets instead of teals. So you gotta take it on a case-by-case basis. And you'll notice that it doesn't increase the saturation like we did with the greens either. This actually decreases saturation as we go into the horizon. Finally, we end with this like off-white color. So like I said, you got to do it on a case-by-case basis, and it would look really weird if we increased the saturation as we go into the horizon. That would look totally unnatural, right? So anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is rules were made to be bent and broken, and that's just what you got to do sometimes. And every image is different. Every pixel artist is different. Every artist has different taste. You might find some other solution that works for you. As like a general rule, and I'd encourage you to share that in the comments. But I hope I've been able to give you a good place to start with your palettes. Okay, so finally I'm going to get rid of that, and I guess I'll bring this back. I don't know if I need the canvas for this. But anyway, I get a ton of questions about palettes, as I mentioned, and since I'm making my own pixel art editor, I've been wondering if there might be a way for my program to help make palettes easier to make, since that's something I think a lot of people struggle with, including myself. And this is still a work in progress, but check this out. So I'm going to double click right here, and I can adjust my palette swatch. I actually don't need this canvas at all. I can adjust my palette swatch. I'm going to choose just a straight up red color, 25500, right? So you can see that's right there. I'm going to go over here, click one over here, and do, let's just say 0, 255, 0. So just solid green, right? So those two colors are now on my palette, and I can just click and drag a line between them. And what do you know? I suddenly have a hue shifted color gradient between two colors, and I only had to add 2 colors to my palette, right? But this isn't very useful, it turns out. This was the first feature I added when I was tinkering with making palette generation easier for the user. And I learned that you kind of have to choose your start and end colors in a way where you know what you're doing, you know? I've just chosen red and green here, and I've ended up with kind of like Starburst or Skittles palettes. We don't want that. That's not useful for pixel art, right? So let's see if we can do better. So I'm going to choose just one color. We're going to use straight up red once again. And I'm going to control click this time and drag, and you can see how it's expanding from both sides now. And there we go. That's something that's a little more useful, isn't it? So you can see we start with some blues, kind of. We go into like some purples, kind of deep red. That's our original color right there. And then we go up into pinks, and we get lighter, and then we're almost kind of in yellows and white. So pretty cool, right? And let's do the same thing with green. Green actually works really well. So I'm going to choose a pretty bright green color. We're going to do the same thing. And that's a good looking palette right there. So you can see again, we start with blues. We move towards the middle of green. Here's our original color. And then as we go into lighter colors, we shift towards yellow. So that's exactly what I was talking about. And you can see in both of these palettes here, in this one we shift towards yellow, in this one we shift towards yellow when we get brighter, we shift towards blue when we get darker, we shift towards blue when we get darker. So that's pretty useful, huh? It's not perfect yet, but I've already been able to make some useful palettes with it. I'll put one up on the screen that I actually did make with SpriteScene, and that was actually without this control click feature, which I gotta say is pretty impressive. So with a little manual tinkering, I was able to make that. And anyway, I'll probably make a proper video to introduce SpriteScene sometime in the future when the program's a little further along, because I have a lot of big plans for this. So there you have it. That was my first video as Will Sensei. Takusan naraimashita ka? Now that we know the fundamentals of making palettes, in the next lesson we'll actually start drawing some sprites. If you liked this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe and comment. I'm always looking for feedback. Don't forget, even though I'm Will Sensei, I'm still learning too. If you want to support the channel and help me make more videos like this, check out my Patreon. If you support me, you can also get pixel art made by me to use in your game. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Mata kondo!